Jesus Christ, her face. Jesus, that's so cringe. Gee, that's so lame, bro.
The state of WoW storytelling is terrible, and with the recent release of 11.17 Legacy of Arathor, I have never felt more disconnected from what Warcraft means, even when we were chasing Sylvanas through Shadowlands.
What a terrible questline! Oh! Oh, they f***ed on my WoW lore again. Oh no. Bro, I'm just hoping that because Metzen wasn't really involved in the War Within, that we're gonna see a difference in the story written from now on out.
It gets better. You probably are tired of low-budget storytelling, and I bet the writing and characters in WoW over the past few years have felt very unrelatable, bland, boring, and simply lame. At least for us. I'm not a fan of every major male leader, hero, or character of any significance being relegated to a support role or essentially just being an emotional bag of ugh. The whole expansion is themed around Alleria chasing Xal'atath, which wouldn't be bad if Khadgar wouldn't be in a damn wheelchair. The most powerful sorcerer being chair-ridden just feels bad. If you want Khadgar out of the picture for whatever reason, why not give him an actual story with Jaina where he passes the torch onto her? She's likely on almost equal levels of strength, if not more at this point. Have Khadgar be her mentor, teacher, instead of him being sad in a chair in Dornogal for 3 patches. I'm not touching Anduin right now, by the way, in any shape or form. In Dragonflight, it felt the whole narrative structure was following either Alexstrasza and Virnoth's debates of the fate of the Dragonkin, Marithra and Tyrande spearheading the Emerald Dream campaign, Emberthal being the lead face and inspiration for the Aberys campaign, even though it should have been about Rathian and Sibelian, taking the mantle forward to the Black Dragons, and even Nosdormu's act was hijacked by Chromie. Shadowlands felt more about Sylvanas and Tyrande dancing around the jailer. In BFA, the prominent dudes were Saurfang, Nathanos and Rastakhan, and they all died in favor of their female foils. Rastakhan killed in Jaina's raid on the Zara Lord, leaving the mantle to his daughter. Nathanos, Sylvanas' boyfriend, died for her, killed by Tyrande, and Saurfang, what should have been one of the main protagonists, died, admittedly as a martyr, killed by Sylvanas in an honorless way in Magora, forever forgotten and unresolved, and never had his honor revenged because that's a foreign concept for modern WoW storytellers. Look, these might be a bit of a stretch, but my feelings on what Warcraft is like are real, and I don't mind baddies. Hell, I love them. When they are written right and not forced into the story, and with the Doom of Kesh, I actually have 2 new favorite female characters I absolutely adore, and we'll talk about them in a minute. I won't unpack any more stuff. I'm sure you have your own gripes with how some of the story has been written, or maybe not. Maybe you enjoy the modern WoW stories, in which case, nothing I say about it will make you like me anymore. But even for those who don't have any issue with the things I have just mentioned, the new story has to ring home, has to appeal in some way, because it is legit what makes Warcraft, Warcraft. I dare say that after listening to the Doom of Kesh, Warcraft storytelling is back. Not only that, it made me feel hopeful for 11.2 Ghosts of Kesh being the shift we needed to actually care about the quests we do, the factions we gather reputation for, and generally the world we live in as players. World of Warcraft just came out with the best story I have personally listened to since Legion. It is so good that it reminds me of times when I used to feel dread about the obvious impending doom of the fallen Prince Arthas and his journey into the darkness, away from the light. It provided suspense and thrill similarly found in the Illidan book that was wrote for the Legion expansion. Most of all, it was Warcraft. There were cool moments, there were sad moments, there was a hero, a betrayal, a love, a loss, and a lesson learned. The story was such a different vibe from what we have gotten as players in the last 3 or 4 expansions that I simply forgot what it meant to love the World of Warcraft. Not the game, although that's pretty cool too, but the actual world we like to play in and have dreamed of being inside of for decades. This felt like a totally different WoW than what we have been playing for the past 3 expansions, and I couldn't help but be hopeful for the future, which is still uncertain, but the reception of this short story can hopefully push it in the right direction. I will start talking about it in a second, not a whole lot, but if you don't want to be spoiled, now is maybe the time to pause this video, go read it or listen to it, links are down in the description, because there is a pretty important plot twist that actually brought me to tears and I will mention it here. But first, why is the story even important? I believe it's crucial towards building up emotional weight to what arguably matters the most for World of Warcraft as a video game, a cinematic. Why do people buy the game? Why was it so popular in the days of the Arthases and the Illidans? A lot of it had to do with the cinematic of it being announced, but also the cover art on the box game. The reason I am saying this is because a lot of players don't care about how good the story is or who the characters really are. So what makes them buy the game? The newly announced expansion, outside the gameplay of which they might know nothing about. It's definitely the announced cinematics that can either come out on BlizzCons, Gamescons, or simply YouTube. A banger cinematic can get any gamer hyped, whether they see their favorite WoW character in it doing some epic stuff, or just epic stuff happening anyway. You can look at some of the most popular cinematics from earlier WoW days that enthralled the whole world into this game, despite age differences, cultural differences, and gaming preferences. Hunters, druids, warriors, and mages were doing cool shit in vanilla. The money shot of Illidan yelling, "You are not prepared!" Arthas' quiet and menacing advance of death through Northrend to declare war on Azeroth. Deathwing's destruction of it. Pandaria reveal, the orcs freed from the demonic slavery. Sylvanas yelling, also, Sylvanas breaking the helm of domination, and whatever you have to say about the results of Shadowlands, the truth is it broke records of copies sold, being the fastest selling PC game up until that point, and definitely outselling expansions like Wrath of the Lich King by a mile. Why is that? And why did sales started dropping with Dragonflight and The War Within despite being objectively better expansions than Shadowlands? It's because of the lack of a cool, badass moment or money shot portrayed in a cinematic that can get people super hyped for it and drive in droves to eat up all of those copies day one. Which box art would make you want to buy the game more? The art of Arthas holding down Frostmourne after what he did in the cinematic, which was unspeakably epic in proportions and stakes? Or the War Within box art of Xal'atath and the cast of WoW friends after the War Within cinematic had Anduin and Thrall stare at a forgotten plot device? None of this is represented in the box art because none of this has anything to do with the War Within. But thankfully we had a second cinematic, Shadows Beneath, that barely fares any better. What does Xal'atath actually do here except nothing? Because nothing happens in the War Within cinematic. Why do I care about this one-armed chick getting all geared up and ready for battle, I guess? What battle? Who is she? Why is she angry? What is this Earthen doing? Crafting something? Why does this matter? And oh dear, hello there. I don't know what you're doing, but I like it. And still nothing happens, and it is pure reflection of the problem with modern WoW storytelling that does not help people get hyped for the game, does not get them to buy it and subsequently play it, since nobody knows who these people are. When you keep introducing new peoples, new races, new cultures, without an actual build-up, an actual story to hook people in, you'll just get deadpan silences in the audience. Arthas was a character in Warcraft 3 that put Warcraft in the hands of all RTS fans with a gut-wrenching story, and now he's an MMO villain. Same with Illidan, same with Deathwing. Necromancers, dragons, and demons, things that people understand and know about because WoW's story was simple, and by looking at the characters you could tell what they might be up to. Where in the War Within do we engage in colossal blacksmithing of epic legendary fantasy gear to take into battle? Where is the story of the Haranir? The proto-trolls or elves or whatever they are, clearly a druidic focus. No, the plumber quests we do prior to Undermine is not it. Farron at least had some more story with her people in the Nightfall mini-event that was terribly executed and with no actual lore or substance behind it, and the Legacy of the Arathor that completely missed the mark with what a story is, what a character development is, and what the player actually wants and expects out of World of Warcraft. And if I, as an uneducated fan, can point this out, you have serious issues in the story department. All of these issues come from the story, which builds up to an epic cinematic that people can get hyped about and a cool box art that people want to buy so they can play the game. Obviously the game is digital now, but the sentiment is the same. This is why the story of the Ethereals, Kesh, and Dimensius changes that. Second, how will it influence the patch and next expansion? The Doom of Kesh goes into the history of the Kereshi and how they became Ethereals. Let me tell you a fun fact about the power of a good story. We made 2 big videos on this channel about Ethereals as a playable race and talked a lot about Ethereals this, Ethereals that, and after listening to this audio story, I have to force myself to call them Ethereals and not Kereshi. The story dives so deep into their culture, their struggles, their humanity, for lack of a better word, that I got completely convinced and fell in love with them full on. So much so that whatever art Blizzard releases that has either Ethereals on it, or Dimensius, I'm freaking sold. The story follows Alleria's struggle to accept her void powers and prevent Xal'atath from messing things up by seeking the guidance of Locus Walker. He senses her struggle and wants to teach her a lesson by taking her on a hunt and telling her his story, which implicitly is the story of the Kereshi and how Dimensius devoured their world, subsequently turning them into Ethereals. Locus Walker wasn't always Locus Walker. He had friends in Nexus Princess Kyvezza, which wasn't called Nexus Princess at that time, my favorite raid boss in Nerebar that actually doesn't die, but also one of the only good characters Shadowlands created, which is Venari, both of which will have a return in 11.2, at least Venari does. At least that's the implication, because Venari in the story is called Nari, so we can assume they're talking about Venari, which eventually became a broker in the end. These 2 women play a very crucial part in the story of Kesh and show what a good friendship can do in the face of adversity, calamity, and inevitably betrayal. Not only that, but Locus Walker had a love in a Kereshi woman from a different caste than his, a more forbidden love, or at least heavily frowned upon. His relationship with Krysson, which was her name, built him up as the Locus Walker, gave him strength, purpose, and determination to do what was necessary despite the whole world seemingly being against him. The way they are portrayed as they slowly decay from physical beings into what Ethereals are, not being able to feel each other's touch, is depressing as all hell and adds that sorrow and dramatic tinge to the story. The almost unshaken trust and bond between Venari, Kyvezza, and our protagonist gives us, the reader, a sense of companionship, safety in a solitary world with no allies. And here is where the spoilers get heavy. You have been warned. By the end of the story, they all separate for different reasons, all while Alleria, by now very curious about the story and the end of it, asks more and more personal questions about Locus Walker's love, most likely as a sympathetic wife and mother of her own who doesn't know how to reconcile her love for her family, her longing for them, and her path as a void warrior against, ironically, the Void. It is revealed that the hunt they were on was for a Void beast that turns out to be a lost and corrupted Krysson, which Locus Walker silently laments over as her being his only anchor and source of strength during the conflict with Dimensius. Locus Walker points out as they finish their prey, essentially ending the twisted existence of Krysson, how letting go of attachments and emotional connections is the lesson Alleria needs to learn to be able to face Xal'atath, since this whole story happens before the War Within story canonically takes place. Yet Alleria understands the irony that the lesson is exactly the opposite, and she ends up teaching him that love breeds strength, bonds give determination, from the actual example of his own story about how Krysson pushed him to accomplish what would end up saving his people from total annihilation. The story ends with Alleria going back to the not yet destroyed Dalaran and Locus Walker consuming the void heart of his lost love in what is implied to be a bitter farewell to a part of of his past forever gone. The bitter sadness is wrapped around in hope and strength to push through the incoming threat to the world, and it's a feeling that we haven't had properly put into the game since Legion. At least that's how I felt. The fact that the characters have an actual personality pushes the story forward, and after watching it or listening to it, I went into the 11.2 PTR and browsed the raid and dungeon roster journal to find out about all of the characters I just read about. This is the power of a good story, and this is what Warcraft used to be about that made me one of its biggest fans. Ghosts of Kesh might be one of the best story-driven patches we have ever received, and I sure hope we get nothing but this level of World of Warcraft story, whether it is in the game, in cinematics or books, but preferably in the game. And what better way to start the 11.2 patch than with a main and an alt? And if you are having troubles choosing one, here's how we are doing it in this video.